You're going to need to set this. This is really easier. I'll let you do this one.
Okay, thank you.
You want to set it for 10 minutes. So you want to clear it first, or you can just go back to the 10 that's already set for. Okay. Oh, sure, I gave you the easy one, and 2 years later, I'm still trying to clear this sucker. Okay.
Nobody could figure that one out yesterday.
Yeah, well, guess what? Apparently, I'm not doing such a hot job today. All right. All right, so you're going to give me the minute off the clock, and then we're both going to press, and let me just do this. All right.
Ready?
Yes. Okay. My name is Courtney McCardle. This is Jared Morgenstein. We are the consulting firm hired by Hershey's to speak to you all, the board of the Hershey's Company. We will be speaking to you today on some of the ethical aspects that highlighted our case with regards to the issue of child slavery in farming their cocoa.
In West Africa.
Okay, we are both ready. And it makes great sense to push this. You ready?
Yes. I'd like you all to imagine with me for a moment. You're waking up with your family on a beautiful spring day in Western Africa, and you go out and you go to try and find some food from your family, because you normally hunt for your food over there. Unfortunately, there is none around, and you don't have any other resources to find any other food. You don't have any left in storage, and there's no other options for you. Suddenly, someone comes up to your doorstep and offers to take your child to a local cocoa farm in hopes of bringing money home to your family so that you can start paying for them and supporting them. Unfortunately, they never see their child again in most cases, and that's what a lot of these families in Western Africa are dealing with in the issue of child slavery with regards to the cocoa industry. And that brings us to our major ethical issue here today, is that Hershey's is actually supporting these violations of human rights and labor laws. And some secondary ethical issues, that Hershey's is actually violating the social contracts of not only our social contract, which would be the laws here, but international social contracts as well, Ivory Coast and other Western African countries' labor laws. And another ethical issue with that they are not transparent with their information. They're not telling anybody about it, and even in their major lawsuit right now, they are being withholding of that vital information. I'm going to align a framework for you all so that it's easier to understand how we're going to present our case here today. My colleague here, Jared, is going to present some research with regards to our presentation, and then present two key ethical theories to present that from: the social contract theory, which we will elaborate on, and rule utilitarianism, and then I will present some counter-arguments and then finally conclude with our case. Jared?
Thank you. So I think to begin with some of the basic research, we should know that 70% of cocoa in the world is farmed from West Africa. So this is not a small issue. This is not just something that's going on in the background. This is the majority of chocolate sold in the world is coming from these farms in these areas. To understand the issues from an ethical perspective, we have to compare Hershey to other major candy manufacturers. And so to do that, I'm comparing them to Mars, which is their biggest international competitor. Currently, Mars gains 35% of their cocoa, that we have verified, probably higher by now, since that was 2012, from ethically sourced places, fair trade chocolate, whereas Hershey has just barely gotten up to 18% at this point. And the interesting thing about that is that Mars currently sells 5 times more chocolate than Hershey's does on an international scale. So we can see that just because you're gaining fair trade chocolate does not limit the corporation's ability to become successful, which is interesting in this case, as you see when we get to the ethical perspective. To apply this to the theories that we've gained, and to make the theories a little bit more clear for you, to start with social contract theory. Social contracts, in a simple, colloquial way, is just a mutual agreement between 2 or more parties about an understanding. And so, in this case, there's a few different social contracts going on. The first one is that these citizens, who are citizens of the Ivory Coast or Ghana, their rights are being ignored because the laws which compel that very country, labor laws, and particularly the Ivory Coast, limits labor to 14 years old, and yet some of the children on the farms are as young as 6. And clearly, from a social contract perspective, that would be unacceptable. But even on a larger scale, the Hershey Company is violating a variety of social contracts. Hershey Company is in an interesting perspective because it's an international company that's based in the United States and yet gains a lot of its products from Western Africa, among other developing countries. And so it has to obey all these different contracts on different levels. So some of the research that would apply to that case, that would be interesting in this case, are the laws that Hershey may be violating in allowing child slavery in West Africa. And these include the Alien Tort Claims Act, which is a United States law, which states that a U.S. corporation acting abroad still has to obey international law. And if it's not, the victims of any breach of that contract can seek justice in U.S. courts, which would be, in this case, people who are victims of slavery or illegal labor. Another law that may seem a little bit more abstract in this case, but has been brought up in a lawsuit as recently as last year toward the Hershey Company, is the U.S. Constitution. The 13th Amendment of the Constitution forbids slavery, and the lawsuit alleges that because the Hershey Company is based in the United States, it has to uphold those principles. In addition, there's also the International Labor Organization, which was established by the Geneva Convention, which holds strictly that all forms of child labor and slavery, as well as torture, are completely illegal under international law. So to move away from the social contract and to talk about utilitarianism for a while, utilitarianism in this case, it's a complicated philosophical theory, but for this case it's very simple. All it means is that we're trying to achieve the best result in the end for everybody involved, not just the Hershey board, not just the people who are consuming the chocolate, but for everybody involved, including those who are working on the farms. And we can see from any perspective that by violating the basic human rights of these individuals, no amount of money can outweigh that harm in the long term. So slavery can never be acceptable under any utilitarian standard. The long-term best interest in this case for the Hershey board, for its own financial interests, as we saw when comparing it to Mars, and for the ethical standards in West Africa, would be to do everything it can to eliminate this problem. And I think perhaps the most compelling argument against slavery inherently is the golden rule, the fact that we should do unto others as we would want done unto us. And in this case, I'm sure that everybody on the board, everybody in the audience can agree that if it was your child, or if it was children we know, or even in this state or in this country that was subjected to these conditions, we would never accept it. And so if we can't accept it here, what's the difference if we're allowing it to go on in some other country? No matter how economically undeveloped it is, it's the same basic human rights. So to continue with some of the counter-arguments and to conclude, let me get back to Courtney.
Thank you, Jared. As I had stated earlier, Hershey's is currently undergoing a very serious lawsuit that was first brought up in 2004, and they have three key counter-arguments to defend their situation on this case. The first one that they state is that fair trade in chocolate would actually decrease their overall profits, and as Jared had stated with the research with their largest competitors, Mars and Nestle, that it actually has little to no effect on their overall profits, and by little effect, it actually increases their profits. When you charge your employees, your product essentially becomes pricier, it becomes more expensive because there's more output going into the making of that product. We see it here with shipping prices in America. So the overall cost of their product once they sell it here in the States actually increases as a result of that. The next counter-argument that they make is that Hershey's isn't essentially responsible for the slavery that's going on in their countries. And Hershey's is owned and operated here in the States. The issue of slavery is the issue of the Ivory Coast, and it's the issue of all the other Western African countries where they get their cocoa from. The biggest argument against that is the fact that even though they're housed here in the States, because they go over there to these impoverished towns, they're seeking out these villages that have these slaves. That essentially makes them a supporter of slavery in these nations. When they're going out and personally seeking out these villages that have these child slaves because they know they can get a product that's cheaper, they're supporting the overall issue over there. And the last argument that they make is that Hershey's has already done enough. They've signed what's known as the Herkenangle Protocol, which is a document that was first originated here in 2001 to help abolish the worst forms of child slavery, and they even formulated a couple charity groups to try and start educating the children and the farmers so they don't really need to do anymore. The issue with this is that they haven't been consistent with it, and it's consistency and enforcement of these new ideas to begin ending the issue of slavery in these nations and hopefully work towards a brighter future for them. So they need to be consistent with this. So to go ahead and wrap up our case here today, based on all the information that we presented to you all and the issue with Hershey's, and by presenting that with the eyes of the social contract and utilitarianism, hopefully that they can work towards a brighter future and ending slavery in these impoverished countries to start having fair trade in cocoa overall. Thank you for your time.